Hey there, everyone. I am Rachel Peniston, Manager of Partnership Programs for the NFCC and your host for today's Financial Facts Chat. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, thank you so much. We are really glad to have you with us. And if you enjoyed today's show, please like, comment, share, subscribe. All of those activities help demonstrate your support for our channel and for nonprofit financial education. I am joined once again by Bruce McClary, SVP of Communications for the NFCC. How are you doing, Bruce?
Doing great, Rachel. How are you?
Good, good. I'm so happy to have warmer weather on the way here in DC and to look out my window and see that spring is coming. I'm just so excited.
Yeah, it's a great time of year. Good to be outdoors. Good to have all this extra sunshine, the warm weather. Couldn't be better. Couldn't be better.
Yeah.
A lot to be happy about this time of year. And I know we're still in the midst of a lot of craziness. So,
yes.
But at least we have the changing of the season to look forward to. And some people might be viewing from places where spring has not reached yet. So I apologize for all this talk about how great the weather is here. We can also, next week, we'll pretend that it's really bad and snowy here. Just to balance out
the discussion. Just to keep it fair.
Yeah, we don't want to upset anyone who might be watching in those circumstances. But apart from all the good things that are happening, there's some news in the debt collection world today. Mm-hmm. So I know we're going to be talking a lot about debt collection and talking about some uncomfortable subjects with debt collection. So it can be stressful. And the benefit that the audience has today is that not only am I a former credit counselor, and not only do I work at the NFCC and I have lending experience, but I also used to be a debt collector. So please keep all your hate mail to yourselves. I'm on the good side now. But because of that experience, I thought I'd share some of my insight into what's happening today, just with the news that came out that's related to debt collection and what questions might come up from people who are dealing with debt collectors. It's never fun to deal with a debt collector, and it can be intimidating sometimes. It can be scary, very stressful for sure. And I just want to try to provide some answers that help put people at ease in those circumstances and give people a little bit of reinforcement on their side of the conversation, because sometimes that fear leads to maybe not enough information or understanding about how your rights are protected, what options you have, and you don't want to back yourself into a corner when you're in a negotiation. I'll just call it a negotiation with a debt collector. So a lot of ground to cover. Before we get started, I thought I would share the news of the day in a link, and then we can start talking about some debt collection questions that people might have. So bear with me for just a second. I'm going to pop this into the post, and then we can talk a little bit about this.
And while you're doing that, I will remind all of our viewers that we always welcome your personal finance questions. We look forward to answering them. So please do add your question in the comment box during our live stream today. That's one way we might be able to address your question on air. But otherwise, you could write to us in a direct email, as an article, comment on our blog. We might try to answer your question there. So we definitely love getting your questions, and we aim to help you get answers to them. So don't be shy about that. It looks like you put some information into the chat box. So I think we're ready to dive in today.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. So the CFPB recently announced, in fact, it was yesterday, that they took action against a debt collector for threatening consumers with legal action. You're probably asking yourself, well, isn't that something a debt collector can do? Can't they call you up and say, well, if you don't pay us, we're gonna sue you, and this is gonna happen, and you'll get a judgment, and then your wages will be garnished. There are actually limitations on that. So they can't, like when I used to be a debt collector, I was told over and over again, you can tell somebody if you're frustrated and you're not getting to the point where you're collecting the debt, you can tell somebody that we will escalate the account, but you can't be specific, because if you start getting specific and you start talking about specific legal outcomes, you're basically becoming the judge and the jury. And that you can't do that, because you can't threaten somebody with a specific legal outcome or legal action. We had a whole separate department at the collection agency that I worked at that would evaluate accounts and make an informed decision about whether or not they would move towards court action, or whether they would kick it back to us and we would try to collect the debt or settle. So that's the main thing there. So it kind of goes along with the same rule that suggests that debt collector, well, it doesn't suggest, it tells debt collectors not to make false claims about what they can and can't do. They can't send you to a debtor's prison, for example. Those don't exist anymore. They used to. The very unfortunate for the people that had to go through that, but that was back in the dark ages. We're modern times now, so people are protected by the rules that are in place for debt collectors. So it's if you can see the post below and you see the link to the article, read that article. It gives you a little bit more information about this enforcement action. And later in the program, we'll talk about when you have issues with debt collectors, how you can take steps to protect yourself and report these things, because that's also important too. You don't want to leave yourself vulnerable, and you want to stand up for yourself. And so we'll talk about specifically where you can go and what you can do. So anyway, that's enough about the CFPB action. The post is below. You can click the link. You can read the article. What are some of the questions that we have about debt collectors and debt collection?
So we do have a couple good ones here. Let's see how many of them we can get through today.
Okay, I'll try to answer fast.
Yeah.
I'll answer fast.
All right. So our first one is, can I stop debt from going to a debt collector? Preventative measure.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you kind of know if you're paying any attention at all to your mail, if you're paying attention to the phone messages you're getting, you kind of have a pretty good heads up if a debt that you owe is falling further and further behind. So you know the different stages. And typically, real quickly, those stages are between 30 and 60 days past due. You probably start getting calls from a customer service person, and it's kind of a soft collection effort. And your account may still be open, but they're trying to get you to pay up to date. And then they're also trying to preserve the status of the account, because it's good for business for them. It keeps you as a customer. So it's all nicey in the early days of debt collection, 30 to 60 days. But when you get past 60 days, when you go 60 to 90, that ratchets things up. Your account, they're probably going to threaten closing your account. If you had any reward points, if it's a credit card, you may have already forfeited those reward points that you worked so hard to earn. You're constantly getting communications. So the fact that your account is going to go into debt collection is probably no surprise at that point. So you can still save things if you reach out and you talk to the creditor. If it's just one account, it's easy to do. Avoiding the calls makes it worse. Avoiding the letters makes it worse. Actually having a discussion with them at the earliest possible time can save your account from ruin, even if you can't pay. So don't think that you have to wait until you have some money saved up to have the conversation so you can say, oh yeah, I've got the money to pay, I'll send it in and everything's fine. Because if it's a temporary situation, your creditor has some hardship programs. If it's just one account, it's easy to do. It's easy to get into that and save your account. So there are things you can do to prevent your account from going to a debt collector, especially if it means plugging into a temporary hardship program or making some kind of an arrangement, some kind of date-specific arrangement to pay the account back up to date and to save the account. So those are the best ways to keep an account from going to debt collection. There are other things that you can do alongside that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's basically the answer is yes, you can keep an account from going to a debt collector.
Thanks, Bruce. Let's move on to our second question. If a debt is in the hands of a debt collector, Can I get them to send it back to the original creditor?
This is where it gets tougher. So the last one was easy. The answer was yes, you can do it. Communication is the secret. You can get in touch with your creditor and you can ask them, to make some arrangements to keep it from going to the debt collector. The creditor can. But if it's gone to the debt collector or a collection agency, that typically means that the original creditor sold the account. So they no longer even own the account. The account is now with a debt collector and they own that account. They probably bought it for pennies on the dollar. And now they're going to make a profit if they can collect more than what they paid, but up to the balance that you owe. So they're not incentivized in any way to send it back to the original creditor. The original creditor probably isn't very incentivized to get it back, because if there's any indication that the full balance can be collected, or if the account, if you're still engaged in the conversation, that is probably better for the debt collector to keep the account and put the pressure on you to pay. But as a debt collector, I was in a few rare circumstances where we were working with the original creditor to get it back in their hands. It's not common. It is not common. So my advice to people would be ask, because you never know what you're going to get unless you ask. So you can always try to reach out to the original creditor and see if they want to take the steps to get the account back. But just be prepared that they may say no. And there's a point at which it becomes too late for it to even be worth it for them. So that's another factor there too, but it gets difficult there. So, don't expect an easy solution, but it never hurts to ask. You can always try.
Sounds like so many things in life that are best approached early if you can catch it early, right?
Yes, exactly. I think this is one of those circumstances where the earlier the request, the more likelihood it might be that you might get a yes.
Well, our third question is an interesting one. How do I know if a debt collector is breaking the law?
That goes to what we talked about with the CFPB action today. So we have an example of where a debt collector was doing something that was out of bounds. So there are a couple of things here. There is something that you should be familiar with. It's called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the FDCPA. And you can look up information about the FDCPA. You can look it up. You can go to the NFCC website, and we've got some blogs and articles about it. But you can also go to the CFPB website, where they have an explanation, bullet point explanation. It's really well written, and it's simple to understand exactly how you're protected. So you can do that. You can go and you can look that up online. And that pretty much covers the main territory of the FDCPA. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the key areas where you are protected. So just in case you get a call from a debt collector, you know what the general areas of protection are. And I'll talk a little bit about how the rules are changing this year, because later this year, new rules go into effect that make this a little bit more interesting and maybe even a little bit more scary for people who owe debt. So the first category of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act puts limits on debt collectors on how they can contact you and how often and what times. And I want to point this out too. The Fair Debt Collection Practices Act applies to third-party debt collectors. So it doesn't apply to your original creditor. It applies to the people who are calling you to collect the debt after your creditor sells the account and closes it down, et cetera. But they can't contact you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. in your local time zone. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. They have to contact you between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. They can't contact you at work once you request that they stop doing it. So if they know you're at work and you've already asked them to stop contacting you, they can't do that. They also have to contact you through your attorney if you are represented by one. And that's for situations if you just go and file bankruptcy more commonly. They can't talk to other people about the debt that you owe. So they can't go calling your house. And then if your spouse answers or your kids answer, they can't just start telling them about the debt that you owe. That's a violation of the law. And they have to stop contacting you entirely if you ask them. So that's a little dangerous because it might make you feel better if you're just not hearing from them. But if it's important to know, what the debt collector wants to get in touch with you about at all stages. Because if you ask them to stop contacting you, you don't really have any early warning about whether or not they're going to take any further action or escalate the account, which is really code word for potentially going legal. So good idea to keep the communication flow open. They also protect you from abusive practices. So they can't use, potty language. they can't threaten or use violence. They can't say they're going to come, shake you down for the money you owe. They can't repeatedly annoy or harass you. That's very vague language, but the update to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act clarifies that after this fall, this is going to be essentially, this is going to mean more than once a day or within a week if they contact you. So there will be specific definitions of what it means to repeatedly annoy or harass. And then they can't call you to collect any kind of payment without clearly identifying themselves as debt collectors after they've determined your identity and that you're the account owner. And the other area is that they have to be honest and transparent in their disclosures. This protects you obviously from scams, all kinds of fake debt collectors. So you have to accurately represent the amount of the debt, whether it is past the statute of limitations. If it's past the statute of limitations, they cannot come after you for that debt legally. They can't legally collect the debt once it's past the statute of limitations. That varies from state to state. And again, going specifically to the CFPB action of today, they cannot infer or specifically state that they're going to take any kind of legal action that will result in one outcome or another. That is not the role of the debt collector. The debt collector is not the judge and the jury. And then they can't lie about who they are to try to collect the debt. So that's the other thing too. They can't call you and say, hey, it's your cousin Rick. And then when you get comfortable and reveal yourself as who you are, then they switch into debt collection mode. They can't do that. That's a tactic that's actually been used before illegally. And lastly, FDCPA really doesn't leave much room for tolerance of unfair practices. So they can't tell you have to send them a post-dated check to cover an amount so it can secure a commitment from you. That's a old tactic that rogue debt collectors used to use. Still goes on today. Thinking of post-dated checks, it kind of sounds old-fashioned because it makes me think of handwriting a check. They can't threaten to seize your property if that's not allowed. Again, that goes back to threatening legal action and the specifics of what they can talk about. And they also can't collect more than you owe. So they can't pad their own pockets with trumped up fees and things like that. They can't do that. So fraud is also, you're protected from fraud. We talked about clarity and transparency. You can request validation of the debt. We've talked about debt validation letters before in the Ask an Expert column and also here. So you can do that. You can make sure you provide proof that they are who they say they are and that they're legally allowed to collect the debt. So that's another thing there. But getting to what's changing this year. So phone calls are limited to once a day and once on attempts to contact you, and once every 7 days if they make contact. They have to wait 7 more days. This is one of the things that's going to be changing later this year in November. So these new rules go into effect. So it's once a day to try to get you on the phone, and once every 7 days if they make contact when they call. So they have to wait 7 more days. Text and email. So the same restrictions as phone, and they also offer you an opt-out option. So if you get a text or an email from a debt collector, you should have an option to opt out of those communications that's provided to you clearly. Work emails, again, we've been over that already. There's just a little bit of a refinement here. Any email address that they use that is known as a work email address, they can't contact you at that email anymore. And then social media, this is the thing that's making the big media buzz. Now they'll be allowed to send you private messages on social media but that also has to come with an opt-out clause. So all of the information about this, you can find a lot of information about the FDCPA on our website. You can find information about the new rules that are going to go into effect in November on our website, nfcc.org. And you can also go straight to the source. You can go to cfpb.gov to get that information. But that was a lot to cover.
Yeah, but good stuff. Good things to know for sure.
Yeah. So any other questions?
Yeah. Looks like we have an important one here. If I find out that a debt collector is breaking the law, how do I report it?
Yeah, so we mentioned, there's one resource we've already mentioned, it's CFPB. Now they do things on the enforcement side, just like we mentioned in the article that we posted down below. But you also need to report things to them. So if there's anything that's happening, we talked about the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, if there are any laws that are being broken that you know of, make sure you're accurately taking notes during these times. Note the time and the date of the call or the email or the communication, the nature of what was said, what was done. Make sure that, go back and look at the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Make sure that you're fairly certain that this is a violation. Then you can go to cfpb.gov and you can report that and they will investigate. So that's one step. And it's a very important step. You can also, if it was a situation where you feel you are in danger, like if there was a threat that was made to you where you feel your safety and security is at risk, you should report it to your local law enforcement and do not wait to do that. So contact your local police, contact the authorities. Also, if you're suspecting fraud, if you're dealing with a debt collector that refuses to validate the debt, well, that's a clue that it's probably not an actual debt collector and they're, looking to, take your money and split. So you should probably report that to the authorities, local authorities as well, and they can investigate. But also keep the CFPB involved because on the federal level, they have the power to do the things like taking action against rogue debt collectors as revealed in that article that I shared. So, do both if you have to. But for just general, like calling at the wrong time or misstating the amount that you owe or using foul language or things like that, for the non-life-threatening emergency situations, no need to involve your local authorities, but definitely contact the CFPB and get them involved. And I can assure you, as I have seen evidence of this myself, that they investigate everything that comes through. So don't think your request is just going to sit there and not get any attention. They're taking all of this very seriously. And ultimately, it leads to enforcement actions against rogue debt collectors like the one that we saw from yesterday's news.
Thanks, Bruce. It looks like we've got one question left. Our last question here is, where can I get help if I'm being hounded by debt collectors?
Yeah, there's still the matter that if you actually owe the debt, if it's legal and legitimate debt and you verified it, you owe it, and you're getting hounded by debt collectors and they're calling, it's not too late to reach out and get help. And it's important to know that a nonprofit credit counseling agency is a resource that is available to you even at the time when your debt has gone over to a third-party debt collection agency. So it truly means that it's never too late to contact a credit counselor, because in that timeline, if you think about your debt collectors and why they're calling you, and if you look at the news that we posted from today, if you're hearing from the debt collector and you're not hearing from an attorney who's serving you with a warrant, that means there's still probably time to work something out. So if you haven't been served with a warrant in debt, and you're still dealing with the debt collector, there may be an opportunity for a nonprofit credit counseling agency to work out a repayment plan, put something together that fits your budget, get you on a track to repayment, and take the pressure off that you have to be feeling when you're getting contacted over and over by a debt collector. But I'll go back to what I said before. You may want to use the option to stop all communication from a third-party debt collector, but I beg you not to, because it is the only way that you know, or that you have a clue as to what steps they might take next. And if you don't have that kind of visibility into what they're doing on the debt collection side, it puts you at a disadvantage, no matter how stressful the communication. So it's really important to keep the flow of communication going. If you're getting letters, you're getting emails, it may be annoying. I think it's just better to be operating in the light of day and knowing what's going on. But all the while that's happening, you can reach out and you can get help. At a nonprofit credit counseling agency, you can find a credit counseling agency at nfcc.org, and they can get you started on a plan that can hopefully keep the debt collectors at bay, and certainly put you on track to pay off the debt that you owe affordably and get you on track for your financial goals. So that's one thing I want to say there. But again, if at all possible, don't stop all forms of communication from the debt collector. That's not a good thing.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that's all the questions we have today. I'm amazed that we got through all of them.
Yeah, that was a lot of questions, but it's a really important topic, and I don't mind going back to my old debt collection days to pull information out of my brain and share it to benefit others who might be feeling the pressure from debt collectors, or they may have some questions of their own about their circumstances. So if you had questions, you're watching today, maybe you're watching after the fact and we're not live. Again, going back to what Rachel mentioned at the top of the show, you can go to nfcc.org and you can use our Ask an Expert feature, and you can ask your questions and we will answer them as they come in. And I'm happy to answer things offline that you might feel were too embarrassing to put forward here in this forum on social media. So happy to do that as well. Should we talk a little bit about our delayed challenge?
Yes, why not?
Yeah, okay. You go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Why not? So, we have been working on our personal finance challenges, and our latest one is to get in touch with a member agency, nonprofit, NFCC member credit counseling agency, and talk to a counselor and kind of learn about the process and sort of report back. Because that requires some scheduling with a counselor, getting in touch with the agency, we don't want to take up too much of their time. We got to prep the questions. We've delayed it a little bit because we want it to be super valuable and have a lot of good information. So stay tuned on that. We don't have an update yet. We haven't had our meetings with the agencies yet, but it's something we are working on and looking forward to.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to bring actual counselors into that discussion so that they can talk about what they do on a day-to-day basis. Just as I used to be a debt collector, I was also a nonprofit credit counselor. But again, that's the old days, and I'm not doing that now. I could answer some of those questions, but it'd be like getting in a time machine. And I'd be talking about credit counseling, 15 years ago. But a lot has changed. And that's the exciting part of this, because we get to learn what's happening now and the kind of tools that the counselors have, how they can help. There's so much that nonprofit credit counselors are doing right now that's vastly different from what was happening when I was doing it. Gosh, I just realized that makes me sound super old, but it's true. So, supported by technology, a lot of different new things that they're able to do in new ways. They're able to help, new programs that are in place that can help people in extreme situations of debt distress. So I think it's really going to be a good conversation. I can't wait to include those counselors and their feedback when we're ready to report back on that challenge. But in a short-term challenge, I'm going to try to have another no spend weekend this weekend. So. Oh,
nice. Good luck. Maybe you can report back on that one.
maybe we'll see what happens. But I did it. Well, I kind of did it last weekend, sort of. But I'm just trying to keep my spending down on the weekends. I got super excited about that no spend weekend and trying to do it as much as possible. So we'll see.
It's a good motivational tool. Now that I'm thinking about it, I might be able to do this weekend too. So I will report back as well and let everyone know how I did.
But remember, no talking other people into buying stuff for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm actually not going to be here this weekend. I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days. So I will be in a situation where other people may be buying a meal or something like that. So there might be some cheating going on. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll
All
see.
right.
But it
Well,
should be
we'll
fun.
report back.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Bruce. I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope that this helps you guys make some wise financial decisions. If you're watching after the live stream, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and we will talk to you again soon.
Yeah. Thank